So Hall and Woodhouse was established in 1777. We're a family business and have been brewing in the heart of Dorset since that date. We've only had 3 breweries over that time, and actually our third one we built in 2012. So we really get value for money from our breweries. In terms of our beer range, we have about 10 bottled beers within our range, as well as cask beers that we sell exclusively to our own pubs. 2012 was a really celebratory year for the business with the opening of the new brewery, but also our head brewer Toby Heisman was voted the head brewer of the year by the All Parliamentary Beer Council. So for us it really marked a fantastic step change in terms of the growth of the business, but also the profile for the brewery as well.
I've been at Hall and Woodhouse now for 11 years and I've been head brewer for 7.5 of those years, which is only a small time in the history of Hall and Woodhouse. We've been going since 1777 and have only had 17 head brewers in that period. So yes, we definitely see a difference where hops are grown. The main hop growing areas in the UK are in the West Midlands, Herefordshire, Worcestershire and down in Kent. That said, we tend to see a greater difference between hops grown in the UK and out of the UK. So I guess an example of that would be Cascade, where if that's grown in the UK, it tends to be quite a lot softer aromas and flavours that come through compared to the Cascade that's grown around Yakima in the US. Within the UK, the differences in flavour on the same varieties tend to be more subtle. Sometimes some brewers will specify, say, East Kent Goldings versus Goldings from Herefordshire or Worcestershire, but those differences tend to be quite a lot less. Single hop beers are quite interesting and sometimes can be used to showcase the flavours that different hops can provide to a beer, both in terms of aroma and flavour. We were one of the first breweries to showcase single hop beers, and in 2005 we launched a beer with using First Gold hops, and that won a double gold medal at the International Beer Awards. So it shows what can be achieved with single hopped beers. Our yeast is unique to us and definitely provides flavours to our beers. We can trace the yeast that we use here at Hall and Woodhouse back to 1933 when Mr. Douglas came in as head brewer, and he had come from Portsmouth breweries, and our belief is that he brought that yeast with him. We've had it fingerprinted and we get it stored off-site in 2 yeast banks to add some security, and we're confident there is no other brewery in the world using our yeast, and certainly the yeast banks cannot find another yeast in their history that's the same as ours. The Gribble Inn is one of our public houses in Sussex, and when we took on the lease for the Gribble, it has its own microbrewery, and one of its beers was Thirsty Ferret, which we've now been brewing and bottling in Blandford for over 15 years. The beer itself is our best-selling beer in bottle, and is a key part of Hall and Woodhouse now. So in the last 5 years, we've started to do some quite exciting work, and each year we produce a celebration beer, which is a limited edition beer that celebrates our Founders' Day. We do those as bottle conditioned beers so that over time they will mature and change with age. We leave a small amount of yeast in the bottle, which helps that beer mature and change over time. We've generally done them as stronger beers, which makes them a little bit more robust in terms of flavour, and we see some quite interesting changes in the beers over time. And sometimes the hop character drops down a little bit, and we start to get more sherry-like notes coming through in those stronger beers, which makes them great beers to match with food and pair with different foods. And over time we'll build up quite a repertoire of those beers. At the moment we've got 5, and we've done some great food and beer pairings with them. Yeah, so within my team, our microbiologist and lab team leader, Nikki Rowe, who's a qualified brewer, and Nikki's got a huge fascination with beers and tastings, and she was interested to take her tasting skills to the highest level that she could. So she trained herself up and became a qualified beer sommelier, and is one of the few female beer sommeliers within the UK, which adds a huge amount to us as a company, both in terms of our taste panel in the brewery, but also we use her quite a lot with beer and food pairings, and it just shows the depth of interest that can be in beer and how the food can match with it. And it's great for Nikki that she's furthering her skills which align with her interests and fascination with beer.
Being a beer sommelier at Hall and Woodhouse, it's almost an addition to my proper job, if you like. My actual job title is lab team leader, but I'm also a fully qualified beer sommelier, which is an accreditation run through Beer Academy and the Institute of Brewing. I have to do beer and food matching talks where necessary. I liaise with our marketing and hospitality departments to create beer and food suggestions for the menus for the houses that we run. And it's running tastings, talking about our beer and just trying to spread the word that beer and food is a great match. Dishes that people can actually try at home with beer, you get pretty much anything actually, but really good combinations are always things like pies with maybe our Tanglefoot ale. We actually in our houses do a great steak and Tanglefoot pie, and obviously the Tanglefoot would be a great match to that. The richness of the beer comes through and the richness of the gravy. You've got caramel and toffee and biscuity notes coming through from the malts, which are reflected in the pastry, and it just makes a really sort of sumptuous, really tasty match. Using beer these days, it's much easier to actually have a little dinner party with lots of bottles of different beer than it is to have lots of bottles of different wine. And a really nice thing that I like to do these days is if I'm hosting a dinner party, I'll have a few bottles of beer with each course. So you'll have like 3 bottles of the same beer with the starter, and then you can change over for the main, and then you change over again for the dessert. And it's quite a cheaper alternative, but it's also there's a lot more variety involved there as well. And it's nicer to share smaller bottles of beer with people, and you just get the flexibility going on there.
I think it's fascinating now that within our beers we have a large range of beers, so we hope that within that portfolio there's a beer for every occasion. Within our range of cask beers, Glorious Game I found it as a great entry beer at 3.8%. It uses Dana and Bobek hops, and has a nice auburn golden colour to it with some crystal malt in there, but it's really the Bobek and the Dana that come through to the fore. They're added quite late in the copper, and we dry hop it in fermenter to get a nice level of intensity to the hop character. I think if I then went on, Leaping Legend as a beer showcases some American Amarillo hops, but alongside some Fuggles, so you get the understated traditional character of the Fuggles alongside the more extroverted flavours coming through from the Amarillo. And as a pale beer, it's a really refreshing beer that can suit many different occasions. It goes well on cask, on keg, and in bottle. I think then if I was progressing in the evening, I'd look to move on to some of our other beers, and I think Sturminster Beast, which is the 2016 limited edition Founders beer, really hits so many spots. As a beer lover, it's got huge depth of character into it, which come through from the roasted barley and the chocolate malt that's in there, alongside the oats and a little bit of lactose, which adds the residual sweetness to the beer. It's hopped quite heavily and uses British Hop Association hops in it. It's got Jester, First Gold and Admiral in there, and they add a complexity to that dark beer. And again, that beer was dry hopped in fermenter as well as in the brew house. It's a great beer that you can sup and really enjoy. The last beer that I would showcase was one that actually we made 5 years ago, which was a strong beer. It was a collector's edition beer that we did, and we only made 235 bottles of it, which was one for each year that Hall and Woodhouse has been in existence. And the beer itself started as an 8% traditional ale, which we then we're then infused with some grape must and put through the full champagning process. So we riddled the beer and then degorged it, corked it and wired it and laid it down to rest. And over time that beer has matured with a fantastic condition level in it, and it's great served from champagne flutes with a condition either at the start of the evening with as an introductory beer, or at the end of the evening just to enjoy in a comfy armchair. Great beer to share, coming in at champagne bottles.
As part of our brewery development, we've also invested in our offices and also our visitor centre and brewery tap restaurant, where you can pop by, go on a brewery tour and then come back and try a flight of Badger beers, as well as a beer and ale kind of beer and pie pairing options as well. So it's a really lovely day out, great for weekends away and a beautiful way to explore this glorious county of Dorset.